Hi, welcome to Carlos Castaneda, The Wheel of Time, the wisdom of the shamans of ancient Mexico, or the sorcerers of ancient Mexico. I'm now going to be interpreting quotes from the fourth book in the series, which is called Tales of Power. And here is where things get more esoteric, more magical, more mysterious, more mystical. The self-confidence of the warrior is not the self-confidence of the average man. The average man seeks certainty in the eyes of the onlooker and calls that confidence. The warrior seeks impeccability in his own eyes and calls that humbleness. The average man is hooked to his fellow men, while the warrior is hooked only to infinity. So, what does Don Juan mean when he talks about being hooked to infinity? Well, if one has enough energy, one can see how to attract the living force, how to channel that force, how to acquire that force, the force of intent. So, to be connected to that force means to have acquired enough energy to contact intent. And that is what Don Juan means by being hooked to infinity. So the warrior seeks impeccability in his own eyes. Everything is about himself. See? Not in the ordinary selfish, self-centered, narcissistic sense of me, self-importance. Not that. But to look at oneself with a clear lens, a psychological lens of clarity, precision. To be hooked to infinity means that your energy lines within the cocoon are connected with those outside the cocoon. At the will, the point of the will, just below the abdomen, and the hip area is where the energy lines connect to the external world. Because the world, remember, in sorcerer's terms, is an understanding based on an alternate perception in non-ordinary reality. So, whereas the average man looks to his fellow men, to his peers, his family, his friends, his colleagues, and the social groups in which he mixes for approval, when people in those circles approve of him, they think that the man then has confidence. He can do things, he's capable, he's well liked, he's appreciated for his talents. The average man calls that confidence. But the warrior turns everything like a mirror upon himself, herself, and looks at oneself clearly. What are my weaknesses? What negative feelings am I still holding on to? Feelings of anger, fear, hatred, revenge, disappointment, grief, sadness, and so on. How much of that is consuming my energy? Does it really matter what the outside world thinks of my false self-image anyway? Because why care about an illusion? An illusion doesn't have to be justified. It's false. So, to be impeccable means to look at oneself objectively, without bias. To see oneself as one really is, truthfully, without justification, without defending, without seeking approval, confirmation from others. There are lots of things a warrior can do at a certain time which he couldn't do years before. Those things themselves did not change. What changed was his idea of himself. So when one's fundamental idea of oneself changes, the very nature of reality changes. Suddenly it's alive with new possibilities. It's not a question of, can we create a better world, or maybe, or perhaps we can live in a better world. We exist, we live in that world. That world becomes available, it becomes accessible to us through enhanced perception, direct perception of what is called, in the tonal terms, the unknown. The unknown becomes known, accessible, usable. When your idea changes of yourself and you see new possibilities, you realize that you are capable of so many things that you had no idea you could even do before. You couldn't even contemplate the possibility of doing those things that now come so effortlessly, so easily, because your idea of yourself has changed. The only possible course that a warrior has is to act consistently and without reservations. At a certain moment, he knows enough of the warrior's way to act accordingly, but his old habits and routines may stand in his way. Well, this is like going back to Journey to Ixalan, because when Don Juan talked about having no routines, he didn't mean that a warrior doesn't have a structured program where he sets out to set goals and improve himself and to cultivate himself, to meditate and to practice tensegrity, or the magical passes, or qigong, or some form of bodily practice. Doesn't mean that the warrior doesn't read books and study and cultivate his intellect. Doesn't mean the warrior doesn't meditate and practice silence or spend time in nature. He doesn't let go of all that, but he doesn't become fixed in them. Like Krishnamurti used to say, if meditation becomes a habit, then it's just another habit. What are you meditating for? For enhanced awareness, consciousness, knowledge, wisdom. You see, once one has acquired enough skill, knowledge to act in the warrior's way, it becomes second nature, almost spontaneous. Not spontaneous in the sense of the person who just does everything in the spur of the moment. Not that. Definitely not that. But rather what the Taoists would call Wu Wei, or Wu Wei, the flow of awareness, of energy. Seen, the impressions seen and felt in the immediate apprehension of things, of phenomena. in the abstract, the unknown, the field of awareness. See? So any habit, any routine that's fixed becomes a form of repetition, becomes contradictory to the purpose of fluidity, of grace, of elegance, of yielding, being soft, feeling, as opposed always to thinking. The art or artfulness is to balance the tonal and the nagual, the mystery, the unknown with the known, the spirit with the material. So we mustn't get too fixated on the tonal, on concepts, ideas, theories, descriptions, but to also have a keen perception, direct experience, to have that receptivity, feeling awareness, guided by the spirit, aligned to the abstract. If a warrior is to succeed in anything, its success must come gently, with a great deal of effort, but with no stress or obsession. So, when we force something, push something too hard, we break it. Forcing things doesn't work. Pushing something too hard makes it recede, makes it float away, makes it fall away. Pushing and pulling, those antagonistic forces. The universe doesn't work like that. So we can't get too attached to specific or definite outcomes, much as our self-guided awareness in the tonal, in everyday consciousness would have it, because it wants to be in control, it wants to be in the driver's seat, the captain of the ship. But when we become open and accessible to the Tao, the spirit, the abstract, the nagual, we see that there is a force, one could call it intent, which allows things to operate in a way that presents its own solutions, its own timing, its own reward. And again, it's a question of inner silence to be able to access this state of consciousness. It's a very serious matter, it's a very profound matter. The internal dialogue is what grounds people in the daily world. The world is such and such, or so and so, only because we talk to ourselves about it being such and such. or so and so. The passageway into the world of shamans opens up after the warrior has learned to shut off its internal dialogue. And that mode of awareness that I was just talking about is the mode of awareness that emerges in consciousness when the internal dialogue, the thinking process, the mind comes to a halt. When the inner silence is prolonged long enough through meditation or through the ingestion of a power plant or both, or through certain exercises that are designed specifically to stop the internal dialogue, then we begin to get access into the world of shamans, sorcerers, right? To change your idea of the world is the crux of shamanism, and stopping the internal dialogue is the only way to accomplish it. So that's it. Everything that needs to be known about sorcery can be found out, can be discovered simply through internal silence. That's it. There are no methods or procedures to be known as such. Rather, they become apparent and ordered in their own way when one has access to the sorcerer's world, the shaman's world, which becomes accessible, emerges in consciousness, becomes part of our direct experience when the internal dialogue comes to a halt. Thanks for listening.